In the joyful moments, it's there. The sadness, shame, and sorrow. You know you can't go on like this, so don't. Phone the International Helpline for Abortion Recovery at 866-482-LIFE. Your call is confidential, and you'll be talking with someone who's already been where you are and found the way out. 866-482-LIFE.
A change to the 2020 census is sparking controversy.
The Trump administration is set to add a question about citizenship in the next census.
This data is critical to the department's enforcement of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Well, now the California Attorney General is suing. He writes, quote, including a citizenship question on the 2020 census is not just a bad idea, it is illegal.
Almost every census between 1820 and 1950 had it in some form. Well, Democrats today are blasting the move.
I don't know how it's illegal for a federal agency like the Census Bureau to ask questions.
So I think people thought there was going to be like a smoking gun here. Did we miss something?
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome to today's brand new edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name, congenial, convivial, amiable, and effervescent as always. Great to have you in the conversation. Going to talk about the Second Amendment today. We got retired Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens. This guy is a retired Supreme Court Justice saying that we should demand a repeal of the Second Amendment. Oh, wow. This is a guy that used to sit on the Supreme Court of the United States. That shows you how insidious and how deep into the consciousness of decision makers this mentality has gone. And he's citing these teenagers that marched on Saturday as proof that we need to make changes. Again, taking our advice from the least mature in our civilization, not a smart idea. Anyway, we'll get back to that as the program develops. I want to turn our attention as we start the program today to Psalm 61 and 62. Our reading and prayer schedules found at pray.afa.net. And as we get to Psalm 61 and 62, we get a peek as we look at these two Psalms together, very similar in theme. We see the kind of circumstances that David was in when he wrote these two Psalms. He describes himself in chapter 62 as a leaning wall and a tottering fence. That's how he sees himself. That's how he describes himself. So maybe you can identify with him. He was at a time when he was feeling weak. He was feeling vulnerable. He was so weak, he felt like he was about ready to fall over. He was about ready to collapse, that he was at the end of his resources. He wasn't sure how much more he was going to be able to take. In fact, he says in 62 verse 3, how long will you attack a man to batter him? So he felt like life and people around him were just pummeling him, beating him down. He didn't know how much longer it would last, how much more he could take. So I want to address just for a moment those in our listening audience that are feeling like David did. You may be in the same position that David was today for whatever reason. You, as you're listening, you may not be in that position. You may know people that you love and care about, and they are in that circumstance for whatever reason. They feel kind of beaten up. They feel beaten down by life, by circumstances, and by people. You can pray for them when we go to the prayer in just a few minutes. Now, David was in a situation where he had people that were actively trying to take him down, active enemies, active opponents. They were telling lies about him to other people. They were enjoying it. Now, they made nice when they saw David. They pretended to be his friends. They said nice things to his face, but they knifed him in the back when they were talking to other people. And David knew this. He knew that inwardly they wanted him to fall. They wanted him to fail. That's why it says in Psalm 62:4, they only planned to thrust him down, talking about himself, from his high position, that is, as king. They take pleasure in falsehood. They bless with their mouths, but inwardly they curse. So they were out to launch a coup d'etat, just like our president has enemies against him today that are seeking to launch a coup d'etat. Maybe it'd be good for our president to read Psalm 61 and 62 and pray the prayer from pray.afa.net. Now, David himself did not feel inwardly strong. He didn't feel confident. He didn't feel optimistic. You know, he says in 61 verse 2 that my heart is faint. And what's worse, not only did he feel weak emotionally and mentally, he felt very distant from God. He did not feel close to God. He did not feel like God was close, that God was nearby, that God was near him. He felt about as far away from God as he could be. He says he felt in 61 verse 2 like he was at the end of the earth. He was as far away from God, far away from people as he could get. Now, here are some of the lessons that David learned in this circumstance. He learned in a situation like this that God is our only hope. We are not to put our hopes in man. We'll just get disappointed because they will let us down. They won't meet our expectations. We'll expect them to do something, hope they will do something, and they won't. So we can get angry and we can get frustrated with people for not being there for us, not coming through for us. And that's a sign, by the way, that we are depending on man instead of depending upon God to be our answer and our refuge. So what David wants to tell us is what he really learned through this is that God is the only one we can depend on. Men don't have what we need in these circumstances. So he says in 62 verse 5, for God alone my soul wait in silence, for my hope is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken. On God rests my salvation and my glory, my mighty rock. My refuge is God. Again, notice, for God alone my soul wait in silence. My hope is from him. He only is my rock and salvation. So sometimes we can think that our problem is financial, and if we only had more money, we could deal with this problem. But David says the answer is not in man, and it's also not in money. In chapter 62, verse 9, he says, or Psalm 62, those of low estate are but a breath. They can't help me. Those of high estate are a delusion. They can't help me, because together they are lighter than a breath. Put no trust in extortion, no vain hopes on robbery. If riches increase, set not your heart on them. So more money is not the answer, not a situation that we can buy our way out of, is what David is saying. So what do we do if we're in desperate circumstances like David was? We've got nobody to rescue us. We don't have enough money to fix the problem. We do what David did, is we cry out to God and believe that his power is sufficient to save. He says in Psalm 61:1, hear my cry, O God. Listen to my prayer. From the end of the earth I call to you when my heart is faint. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. So the encouragement here is no matter how far you are from God, no matter how distant you feel you are from God, no matter how faint your cry to him is, God can and will hear you. Sometimes you can feel like, well, it's no use to call out to God. I haven't been walking close to him. I don't feel anywhere near him. I don't even have the right to call out to him and expect him to help me. David did not let that stop him. After we have cried out to God, we can do more things. Wait in silence. Don't get frantic. Don't get into panic. Don't run around trying to, in a panic and anxiety, try to fix things ourselves. And the third thing is to follow God's guidance. He says, lead me to the rock that is higher than I, and he will. Well, let's go to prayer for ourselves and for those that we love and care for. Hear our cry, O God, and listen to our prayer, even when we feel distant from you, as if we were at the ends of the earth. We will still call to you. Even when our heart grows faint, we will call to you. Please lead us to the rock that is higher than we are, the place of safety and security. You are our refuge and our strong tower. We long to dwell in your tent, in your presence forever. and take refuge in the shelter of your wings. We ask you to increase our days and humbly ask that by your grace and power, you will cause our influence and the influence of all who follow you to be felt for many generations. I pray that we will trust in you at all times, pour out our hearts to you, and make you our refuge. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Well, our June Spiritual Heritage Tour is full, and our September trip is filling up fast. So if you want to go with us to Washington, D.C. and Mount Vernon for our Spiritual Heritage Tour, you need to sign up soon. We're going to be seeing lots and lots of sites, including the Capitol, the Library of Congress, the Supreme Court, the Jefferson and Lincoln Memorials, the Korean and Vietnam Memorials, the Arlington National Cemetery, and much, much more. For all the information on this tour, September the 19th through the 22nd, please go to the website spiritualheritagetours.com. That's spiritualheritagetours.com for all the information. And we also go to Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown. That's a separate trip, but we put them back to back in case you want to do both of those tours. Again, that's in September. For more information, go to the website spiritualheritagetours.com.
Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Corner. The House of Representatives passed a measure criminalizing late-term abortion. That legislation is now in the Senate, where they've done absolutely nothing. You see, there's this little extra-constitutional Senate rule called the filibuster, and it requires 60 senators to agree to allow a bill to come to the Senate floor for debate. Republicans, since they have a majority, could change that if they wanted to. Pro-life rhetoric with pro-death inaction. What's it mean to be pro-life nowadays?
Listen to the Hamilton Corner, weekdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Central on AFR. For more from Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Hi, and welcome back. Brian Fisher is my name. The program Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio. Glad to have you in the conversation. Jeff, we were talking on the break about this march for whatever it was, the March Against Guns on Saturday. And we saw yesterday, we covered this story yesterday, that CBS they contracted with a firm that specializes in using digital imagery to count the number of people in a crowd. And they came to the conclusion, if you look carefully at the crowd that was there for this March for Our Lives, I mean, everybody's using the figure 800,000, might have been as many as 1 million there. They said, no, the high watermark for the crowd there on that day was 202,000. Now, also, one other thing that we are being told, this was all, the impression you get is this was all teenagers. They were coming from all over the country, teenagers just flooding the mall. This was teenagers raising their voices to the rest of America. But Jeff said that's not quite accurate.
No, as a matter of fact, a University of Maryland sociologist, Dana Fisher, did a study on this and found out that less than 10% of the crowd were under the age 18 or under.
Less than 10%.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's interesting that David Hogg guy, that teenager that was the kind of the main superstar, he's complaining now that premier colleges are still rejecting him, despite the fact that he, in his own humble terminology, is changing the world. And he can't get over the fact that they're not all welcoming him with open arms. Trump, by the way, still working behind the scenes to see if there's a way he can get the military to pay for the border wall. Now, I don't know constitutional issues about this. Here's what I do know. This omnibus is not a budget. There is a difference between a budget and an omnibus, and it's this. An omnibus allocates money. A budget directs how that money is to be spent. So if Congress passes a budget, they are telling the president, this is where we are directing that this money be spent. But when you pass an omnibus bill, you're just shoving a whole pile of money at the president and say, we've allocated all of this money to you, and it gives him latitude. Maybe Trump will even think enough latitude to just redirect money from one part of the budget directly into building the wall. So we'll see how all of that turns out. Now, this business about repealing the Second Amendment from Justice John Paul Stevens, he's retired, and my response to that looks like he retired not a moment too soon, if you catch my drift. But, you know, the point here is if all of this yammering, all of this politically correct nonsense about guns is even warping the mind of one of the men who was one of the 9 leading jurists in this country, if he could get confused, if he could get his brain turned around on something that is so plain and so simple and so obvious and so unambiguous, you can imagine what all of this propaganda is doing to the minds of people that are not, had very little exposure to the Congress or to the Constitution. I'm willing to bet that Justice Stevens has virtually no exposure to the Constitution. Probably didn't study it in law school. You know, he was one of the dissenters in the Heller decision in 2008 that said that there is an individual right to keep and bear arms. That was the Supreme Court of the United States. That's precedent. And remember, to these guys, precedent is everything. If the Supreme Court rules, that is the law of the land. Now, we know it's not, but they don't, and they believe it is. So according to their own standards, then the right to keep and bear arms, the individual right, is the law of the land. What about that does Justice John Paul Stevens not understand? By the way, there was a rapper that performed at the March for Our Lives. His name is Vic Mensa. I think that's with an H on the end. Well, yeah, he goes by Mensa. That's that group for really, really smart people. So I don't know if he belonged to that or not and adopted that as a performance name. That's for like the people, the top 2% of the smartest people in the entire world. But anyway, he performed as a rapper at this march. He got arrested a year ago on a gun charge. So here's the rally to ban guns featuring a rapper that got busted for breaking the laws, violating concealed carry laws just 1 year ago. Now, there's another rocker that weighed in on this issue. He was one of the rockers that was at that theater, that concert venue in Paris. Remember that? When the Muslims busted in and I don't know how many people they shot. Let me see if I can find the total in here. But it was dozens of people that they killed. 90 dead. I think 130 people were injured. 90 people died in that shootout. And this guy was very harshly critical of these March for Our Lives participants. He said they are vile abusers of the dead. That's the lead singer of the Eagles of Death Metal, not one of my favorite bands in particular. But, you know, he said this: until nobody has a gun, everyone has to. That's a great line. Until nobody has a gun, everyone has to. So as long as there's somebody out there that may have a gun, we need to be prepared to defend ourselves using the force of arms. So he's been very critical of these students and this march and all that, because they had no defense there at all in that concert hall from these Muslims that were determined to wipe them from the face of the earth. So he is opposing this this march. Now, by the way, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the unwieldily named representative from Florida, you know what she did? She submitted a bill today that would require background checks. I don't know if you've seen this yet, Rob. It would require background checks for the purchase of ammunition.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
So she wants there to be their background checks. You want to go and buy a box of shells, you got to go through a background check. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is really no different than what the Crown tried to do back in the days of the Revolutionary War period. They tried to confiscate not just the weapons, but the ammunition, the gunpowder. That's what the colonists were reacting to, is the effort of the Crown to seize not just the guns of our forefathers, but the very ammunition, the ammunition depots where they kept the ammunition. I'll tell a story about that here in just a second. But here is the unwieldily named Debbie Wasserman Schultz clip number 2.
Unlike firearms purchases, someone who wants to go into a store that sells ammunition, this is just such a gaping and grave and dangerous loophole that I could not wrap my mind around it when I was told that that was the case.
You know, the reality is, Rob?
You know, we had a caller yesterday, a truck driver. He was down in Florida driving a truck. He said that's what should be done.
Yeah, he was advocating for this, wasn't he?
To limit and to register ammo.
Yeah. Well, you know, think about it. I mean, ammunition is no good without a gun. I mean, you haven't really done anything to solve the problem. If you think guns are the problem, banning ammunition or requiring background checks isn't going to do a thing. But realize that a lot of what triggered the Revolutionary War was the fact that the British Army, the regulars, they weren't called the British are coming. When Paul Revere went out on his right, he wasn't out there shouting the British are coming, the British are coming. It was the regulars are out. That's what Paul Revere shouted as he rode through the countryside. The regulars are out, referring to the regular troops for the Army of the United Kingdom. And what they were on the march to do that day, number one, they were trying to get hold of Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who were staying at a pastor's house, by the way. That shows you the role that pastors played in the Revolutionary. Jonas Clark, Reverend Jonas Clark, was hosting those guys at his place in Lexington, and the Army was coming through looking for those guys as traitors to the crown. But they were also heading for the ammunition depot that was just on the other side of the Concord Bridge, over by Concord. And that's where they were going, and that was their aim, to get to that ammo depot and confiscate the ammunition. They weren't really even on that trip after the guns. They were after the ammunition. That's what Debbie Wasserman Schultz is after. She's after the ammunition. And that's where the shot heard round the world was fired, whether you're looking at the shot that was fired on the Lexington Green, where British troops shot down 9 colonists in cold blood, or the shots that were fired at the North Bridge. Because what happened is the British troops got to the North Bridge, wanted to cross the North Bridge. The ammo depot was on the other side of the North Bridge, and the farmers, they were farmers. They just brought their muskets, and they gathered on one side of that creek, on one side of that bridge, and said, you are not coming across that bridge. You are not going to confiscate our ammo. And they had a big shootout right there at the North Bridge over the river, and the British turned tail and headed back toward Boston with their tail tucked between their legs. And I've got a great story that I like to tell at our donor appreciation events that we have. We're having one coming up in Wichita, Kansas, by the way, a couple in Texas. And everybody's welcome to these things. If you like the ministry of AFR, we'd love to have you come. At any rate, I'm going to start this story. I probably have to finish it on the other side of the break, but it's a great, great story from the Revolutionary War, and it has to do with the reason for the Second Amendment. And this had to do, Rob, is there something else that you had in mind?
No,
okay.
I'm good.
This had to do, and Jeff, have I, anything you were thinking about adding to the conversation?
Not at this moment.
Okay,
no.
all right. No, I misread your body language.
No.
I'd like to hold the spot for later.
Yeah, I mean, we're waiting in anticipation before the break gets here. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, just waiting for some intelligent thought to come into their minds. No telling how long, that is.
What was the name of that group again? Mensa?
Mensa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Mensa group. Anyway, this is actually before the shot heard round the world. This was in the spring of 1775, about a month before Lexington and Concord, and the British troops had gotten word that the residents of Salem, that's the place where the Salem witch trials were held and all that Salem, Massachusetts, that they had a forge there, and they were turning ships' cannons into field pieces, converting them to field artillery. That's what their intelligence told them. So they set out from Boston Harbor, left under cover of darkness to try to make it a sneak attack or kind of surprise them, come in by stealth to the Salem area, to go confiscate those pieces that were being converted into artillery weapons. So again, now they were coming after the weapons. And remember this, when the Second Amendment was talking about the right to keep and bear arms, they were thinking of things like field pieces. because militia, which is what part of what the Second Amendment was about, to be able to form a militia, they're going to need field pieces. They're going to need artillery. So it's not just guns that you can carry in your hand or in your pocket or even over your shoulder. It could be pieces that can be borne along, carried along to a site of battle. And there is protection in the Second Amendment for that, because that was going to be needed for the proper work of a militia. Anyway, we'll be right back after the break. Don't go away. It's an interesting story. We'll give you the rest when we get back. Focal Point, American Family Radio.
This is Dr. Richard Land, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. President Trump has just upgraded his and America's national security and foreign policy team by nominating Mike Pompeo to be the new Secretary of State and John Bolton to be the new National Security Advisor. No disrespect to their predecessors, who were fine, patriotic Americans, but Pompeo and Bolton are an upgrade. Pompeo, currently serving as CIA Director, graduated first in his class from West Point, graduated from Harvard Law School, and served 3 terms as a congressman from Kansas before becoming CIA Director. He is very much in sync with the president's policies, and he is also a vibrant, deeply devoted evangelical Christian. Bolton, the former American ambassador to the United Nations, is a brilliant and insightful national security expert. He is the person that I recommended to be Secretary of State. Unfortunately, he is so good, the Senate likely would not have confirmed him. I will rest a little easier knowing that Mike Pompeo and John Bolton are advising the president when he meets with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. Mike Pompeo and John Bolton both understand, as does the president, that diplomatic solutions only occur in difficult situations when the prospect of strong military force is at hand. Strong military force and the will to use it tends to focus the attention of the bad actors in the world, and they have to put into the equation, if we do this, what will the Americans do? They didn't have to ask themselves that question under President Obama. They do now. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher
on American Family Radio.
Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at AFR.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at AFA.net.
AFA.net.
Howdy, welcome back to Focal Point. Brian Fisher is my name. Program Focal Point and the network's American Family Radio American Family Radio Network. Again, this poor David Hogg, he thought now that he's changing the world, that he ought to be able to write his own ticket to the college of his choice, and it's not working out that way. Now, he has an SAT score of 1270, which is pretty good, a GPA of 4.2. Never understood how you could do that, but I guess you can take classes, get extra credit or whatever, and have a GPA. I mean, when I was in high school, the best you could get was a 4.0. Anyway, he has been rejected by all 4 UC campuses to which he had submitted college admissions, all 4 of them. Now, he's been accepted by Florida Atlantic University, by Cal Poly, which is a very good school in California, and Cal State San Marcos, but he lamented the fact did not get into his choice schools. Got rejected by UCLA, got rejected by University of California at San Diego, which is another quality school. So he's having a tough time accepting the fact that the UC system doesn't have room for a world changer such as his own distinguished self.
Did you see that he actually appealed to the First Amendment when they were talking about putting clear backpacks in the school? But he wants to do away with the Second Amendment.
Right, yeah. First Amendment is good because that means we don't have to wear clear backpacks to school. What in the world is the connection between that? Good grief. And
so maybe he got extra credit on the Constitution classes is where he got that 4.2.
Yeah.
Making up his own extracurricular kind of.
Well, one of my favorite stories is I went to a luncheon. A good friend of mine, Jeff Ventrella, who used to be, I don't know if he still is, but he was an attorney at the time for the ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom. And he was telling us a story at this lunch meeting about speaking to the Stanford University Law School. And if I've told you this story before on air, just please indulge me. And there'll be a lot of people listening to us for the first time. Our audience is growing virtually by the day, so there are going to be people that haven't heard this story before, even if you have. But he asked this class of first-year law students at Stanford Law School, which is one of the top-rated law schools in the country, how many of you in law school have had a class on the Constitution? Every hand went up. And then he asked this question: how many of you in your class on the Constitution had to read the Federalist Papers? Now, the Federalist Papers were a series of monographs or essays written by James Madison and John Hancock and John Jay to convince the voters in the state of New York to adopt the Constitution. And they went through the whole thing. They meticulously explained it. They said what this provision in the Constitution was about, why it was in there, why it was worthy of their support. So really, you cannot really understand the thinking of the founders that goes into the Constitution unless you read the Federalist Papers, because there are some words there that may be confusing, or we might take them a different way unless we read and understand what the founders meant by that specific word. That's why it's important. So he asked these guys, how many of you had to read the Federalist Papers? And not one hand went up. And a guy came up to him afterwards and said, you know what you should have done? You asked the wrong question there. Said what you should have done is you should have asked these students, how many of you in your class on the Constitution had to read the Constitution? And he said you would have gotten exactly the same response. We didn't study the Constitution. We studied case law. We studied all the various decisions, opinions that the Supreme Court had issued, but we never studied the Constitution itself. We studied what the Supreme Court said the Constitution meant, but you know, the Supreme Court, by its own admission, has been wrong a lot. You know, every time they reverse themselves, they're admitting we goofed. We screwed up on that decision. So anyway, and John Paul Stevens, he's out there saying, man, we got to get rid of the Second Amendment. Now, I want to get back to his column in the New York Times, John Paul Stevens, if we have time here. But back to the story in Salem. They get to Salem, the soldiers, about 240 of them, they get to the little city of Salem. They disembark from the boat, and they're marching into the town of Salem, where there's a meeting house. And they chose 2 o'clock in the afternoon to show up because they knew that everybody was going to be in church. Everybody went to morning church, and everybody in the entire town went to afternoon church. So they knew at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody was going to be in church in the town of Salem. And they thought maybe we could catch them off guard. Well, Paul Revere and his boys had gotten wind of what they were doing, so they had gotten the word out to the militia in that whole area that the regulars are on the way to the city of Salem. So you had militia from a number of the surrounding communities, including the Salem militia, showed up in the city of Salem. So the British troops are marching through town, and there's a little river that you have to cross to get to the forge where they had information that these cannons were. Well, there was a drawbridge over this river, and what had happened is some of the young guys, they drew up the drawbridge. The guys in Salem drew up the drawbridge so the British couldn't get across. And some of the young teenage boys in Salem, they were sitting up on top of the bridge. The drawbridge was up, and they were dangling their feet over the edge, and they were just hollering and hooting at those British soldiers and making fun of them and calling them lobster coats and all that kind of stuff. And so things started to get a little bit testy. And the British troops saw that there were these 3 ships called gundalaus that were kind of tied up to the bank of the river there. And they decided, well, we'll just get in those boats and we'll go across the North River in these boats. So the colonists saw what they were about to do, so they jumped in these gundalaus, and they started punching holes in the bottom of the boat. So the boats would sink, and the British regulars couldn't use them. And one of the British regulars went right up to a guy who worked in a brewery, and he pointed his gun at him at point-blank range and had his bayonet extended at him and threatened to shoot him. And the guy just ripped off his shirt and said, "Go ahead, I dare you." And the guy actually lunged at him with the bayonet and drew blood. So the first blood in the Revolutionary skirmish was drawn by this guy that worked in a brewery. But anyway, he drew blood but backed off. And then you got the militia now crowding the British troops. They have nowhere to go because they can't go across the river. It's blocked by militia. The drawbridge is up. So things are getting pretty tense right there. when through the crowd you could see this guy in a black robe walking up to the British commander who was in a red coat. And the guy in the black robe was a pastor. His name was Thomas Bernard. And he came through the crowd saying, my name is Thomas Bernard, I am a minister of the gospel, and my mission is peace. So they let him go through the crowd. He came up, and he took the Colonel North, off to the side, and was talking to them about his proposal. And his proposal was this. Now, he knew, by the way, that the colonists in Salem had already taken those cannon, and they'd hid them in the forest, dumped a bunch of leaves on top of them so they were concealed from view. They were already gone from the fort. He knew that. So he comes up to the lieutenant and he says, look, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. If you promise me, if you give me your word as an officer and a gentleman, this is back at a time when that actually meant something. He says, you give me your word as an officer and a gentleman that if I persuade them to lower the drawbridge, you will only go to the forge and you'll look in the forge, and if you don't find what you're looking for, you will come right back across the river. I will get them to draw the drawbridge. And the officer gave him his word as an officer and a gentleman. That's what we'll do. So sure enough, they dropped the drawbridge, and the soldiers went across the drawbridge, went to the forge, and sure enough, they didn't find any of those cannons. So they came back across the river and started marching out of town. And there was a housewife. Her name was Sarah Townsend. There was a housewife living on the main street there. She was up on the second floor, and she leaned out the window of her second floor and started hollering at these British troops and blasted them for interfering with the Sabbath. What do you think? We're born in a barn that you come in here like owls? You've disturbed our Sabbath. And one of the soldiers aimed his gun right at her. She's leaning out the window. She didn't bat an eye. She said, you don't have the courage to fire. And sure enough, he didn't. He withdrew the rifle, and they kept marching out of town. The teenagers that used to be up on the drawbridge, they're coming along, marching alongside the British troops, goose-stepping and making fun of them as they left town. So you think about that. That's why I like telling it. Think about the people that did this. I mean, this is the mightiest military in the world. And who stopped them? Today the rough parallel would be a guy that drives a truck, a blue-collar worker that drives a truck, a stay-at-home housewife, a full-time mom, and a minister of the gospel. Very ordinary people, but they loved liberty, they loved their guns, and they weren't about to let the tyrants from the crown overtake them. So that, to me, is just a great story.
That's
just
great
inspirational.
Story. It's so American, isn't it?
Yeah. Where did you got to wonder, where did that spirit go? We need to get some of that spirit back. But anyway, let me look at a couple of things that John Paul Stevens said in his essay. By the way, remember we talked about that school yesterday that was going to defend themselves by giving the students a pile of rocks?
Yeah.
Well, he got laughed at so bad. He said, okay, we are now going to hire armed security for every school. We heard you. So now it's going to be armed security for every school in the district. So learned his lesson on that deal. But here are some of the things that John Paul Stevens said in his essay in the New York Times. He said what's really needed is a repeal of the Second Amendment. He says the initial reasons behind the Second Amendment, including that a national, quote, national standing army might pose a threat to the security of the separate states, end quote, are a, quote, relic of the 18th century, end quote. So it's outdated, it's antiquated. That's the line that we heard at the March for Our Lives. And he said for 200 years it was understood that the Second Amendment did not preclude federal or state gun control legislation. Now he argued that that understanding has been unduly challenged by the National Rifle Association. That is wrong. Not been challenged by the National Rifle Association. It has been challenged and set aside by the Supreme Court of the United States. The Heller decision in 2008 decisively established the fact that the Constitution protects an individual right to bear arms. He was one of the four dissenters in that. So he said we just need to get out there and we need to repeal the Second Amendment by overturning it, make a Constitution amendment that overturns the Second Amendment. So that's what he wants to do, move Saturday's marchers, these teenagers, closer to their objective than any other possible reform. But you look at the words of the Second Amendment itself, which we have done repeatedly. It says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A militia being necessary for the security and safety of a free state, the right of the people, that's you and me, it's not the right of the militia, the right of the people to keep, that means to own them, and to bear, that means to carry them, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We've talked about this before. That last phrase, what does it mean, shall not be infringed? It means that right already existed. The right existed before the Constitution was written. It is a God-given right to protect ourselves from violence. We'll be back with your phone calls. Stay with us. Be right back.
Announcing 3 new episodes of Ryan DeFrady's Secret Agent. These animated half-hour episodes will entertain children.
That's right!
And teach lessons about joy, patience, and the dangers of selfishness. Ryan DeFrady's is a secret agent with a whole lot to learn, and he insists on working alone until he's paired with a very unlikely partner.
Mommy!
Ryan DeFrady's Secret Agent, episodes 4, 5, and 6 from American Family Studios are available now at afastore.net.
Exposing Washington with Walker Wildman.
So who is responsible for the dysfunction in Washington? That's what we're going to be discussing today.
We have become one of the most litigious societies on the planet.
The goal of this show is to bring clarity to the news coming out of Washington, D.C., and to expose the deception that has plagued our nation's capital for decades.
Exposing Washington.
Each Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Central.
On American Family Radio.
Are you a responsible person who finds yourself growing deeper and deeper in credit card debt and you're not sure how to fix the problem? Then get ready for a toll-free number that will put you on a path to financial recovery. Trinity Debt Management is a nonprofit organization that will consolidate your accounts into one easy-to-manage monthly payment, put a stop to late fees and over-limit charges, and reduce your interest rates by as much as 60%. You'll save thousands and become debt-free for keeps. It's not a loan. It's a smart way to relieve your stress, meet your obligations, and preserve your self-respect. If your debt has you down, we should talk. Gather up your bills and call this toll-free number for a free, no-obligation debt analysis. 1-800-788-1813. That's 1-800-788-1813. If you're in debt and you need help, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
American Family Radio.
You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Time to take your calls. Number, if you would like to call, be in the conversation about the Second Amendment, about this rally. You know, somebody made it's 888-589-8840, by the way. The number to call if you want to join the program is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Give us a call. We'll get as many of your calls in as we possibly can. But, you know, when you think about this rally on Saturday, what is the message? This is a Democratic rally. This is a liberal rally. Probably got some George Soros money behind it somewhere. Adults did all the organizing of this thing, provided all the money for this thing. But you think of the words that were coming out of these teenagers' mouths and how mindless they were, how little understanding they have about the Constitution, how little understanding they have about guns. Even John Stevens in his op-ed says we need to ban semi-automatic weapons. Well, apparently what John Stevens doesn't understand, that's virtually every gun that's sold in America outside of a revolver, right, Rob? Just about everything is a semi-automatic weapon.
And single-action rifles and, single-shot
bolt-action rifles and stuff. But
pump action.
Yeah, if you got a gun for self-defense, it's probably going to be semi-automatic. You have to pull the trigger every time to get a gun to fire. But apparently John Paul Stevens doesn't even know that, and he's the guy that wants a repeal of the Second Amendment, doesn't even understand it. But what this rally tells you is that the Democratic Party today is so simple, and it is so simple-minded that even a teenager can run it. That's the lesson from that march. All those teenagers up on the platform just spewing the Democratic agenda on gun control. The Democratic Party is so simple, so simple-minded, so naive that even a teenager can run it.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
You know, they call an AR-15 a assault weapon, which is an incorrect statement. It's a sporting rifle, defense rifle. Assault weapons are in the hands of our military. Why can't we call this March for Life the March Against Guns?
That's really what it was.
Because that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
I feel like we should be able to call it what it is.
Yeah, it's a march against guns. They're saying, oh, we're not here to take away your guns. Well, yeah, it sure sounded like it to me. All right, let's go to the phones. 888-589-8840 is the number to call if you want to join the conversation. Glad to have you on board. Let's begin by talking to Carrie in Mississippi. Carrie, welcome. What's on your mind?
Well, I was going to just make a quick comment about the concealed, background checks for ammo, and I don't necessarily agree with it or disagree with it, but what I would say is if they were to put it into place, it wouldn't be a bad idea to, the same way you get a concealed carry permit, you can just buy a gun by showing the concealed carry permit, just issue like a piece of paper that shows where you've had a background check done, and it would be good for a year. It wouldn't cost you anything, and then you could just show that every time you went to buy ammo instead of having to go through the hassle of doing a background check every time.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons for they're talking about doing background check for buying ammo is where you can buy a gun secondhand from just an individual person is one of the reasons that they're considering doing a background check for buying ammunition.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right about that. And I guess my sense of the thing is, their issue is guns. They've never said the issue is ammunition. Their issue has always been guns. But now they're going beyond guns. I mean, if the idea is guns, you want universal background checks for guns, that's fine. We want to get people that have committed crimes. We want to get them in the national crime identification system. That's what happened in Sutherland Springs. That guy that shot up that church, killed 26 people, he'd committed the type of domestic crime that disqualified him from buying a firearm, but the Air Force had not uploaded that information, as they're required to do, to the national database. He should never have been allowed to purchase a gun. And the kid that shot up the school in Florida, he likewise had been a decision had been made to involuntarily commit him to a mental facility for evaluation. And again, that's the kind of thing that needs to appear on a background check. He never should have been able to buy a gun. But because the background check had those holes in it, you do a background check, it's only going to be as good as your database. So it seems, I'm fine with a background check. I'm fine with that, because I think if you've committed a crime, one of the things that you forfeit is your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. But you've had due process. You've been able to face your accuser in open court. You've had an attorney for your defense. And if you're found guilty of some kind of crime of violence, some kind of gun crime or something like that, then yeah, you can be asked to give up your constitutional right to keep and bear arms, but only if you've had due process. It seems to me the thing we want to do is just kind of strengthen those background checks.
One of the things that the left always says, or anti-constitutionalists always say, yeah, we just want to take the AR-15. We just want to take that out of play. Well, it always goes now, like the retired justice just said, he wants all semi-automatic weapons banned.
That really struck me.
So it's sort of like, they always play us down and say, no, we just want the, we're not trying to take your guns away. But every time it always leads to the next step. And that's what Debbie Wasserman Schultz did with the ammo. It's just anot's step.
Yeah, it's really about disarming the American people.
That's right.
And that's what, that struck me in his essay or his column. He's suggesting legislation, this is a quote, prohibiting civilian ownership of semi-automatic weapons. That would be a pistol that you might keep in your house to protect your family. If it's semi-automatic, in other words, you can fire 1 round per squeeze out of a magazine, then he wants to make that illegal. All right, let's go to Carrie in Memphis, Tennessee. Carrie, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Yeah, I want to expand a little bit on the original intent of the phrase "shall not be infringed." I mean, Scalia in the syllabus, the teller. I mean, 2 sentences kind of says it all right here. Let me read them to you. It says the anti-federalists feared that the federal government would disarm the people in order to disable the citizens' militia, enabling a politicized standing army or a select militia to rule. The response was to deny Congress power to abridge the ancient right of individuals to keep and bear arms so that the ideal of a citizens' militia would be preserved.
Well, you got it right there, Kerry. This is from Antonin Scalia, his majority opinion. The ancient right to keep and bear arms. And Congress was saying, or the founders were saying to Congress, keep your hands off the guns of the American people, because this is an ancient right. It precedes the formation of America, precedes the issuing of the Declaration of Independence, it precedes the writing of the Constitution, precedes the forming of our first government. This is an ancient right. It already exists. It's an existing right. It's an inherent right. So we're not conferring the right to keep and bear arms. We're not granting it. We're not establishing it. We are simply affirming it, saying it's an ancient right. It's an inherent right. It's one of the God-given rights that God has given us, the capacity to defend ourselves. Even Jesus respected the right of self-defense in Luke 22:36. Remember, he told his disciples, you don't have a sword, sell everything you got and go buy one, because I'm going to be numbered with the transgressors. You might be too. They may come after you. You need to be prepared to defend yourself. All right, Kerry, thank you for that. Right to the source of the Supreme Court opinion itself. Let's go to Matthew in Mobile, Alabama. Matthew, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. That's hard for me to hear. I'm driving a big truck down the road, but I just want to say, it's just crazy how all these young kids think that taking away guns is going to solve the problem. I mean, when really more guns would solve the problem. I mean, all these mass shootings that take place are all in very strict, gun zones where they have very strict regulations, and that's just, the facts are not lying. They just won't, observe them and take them for their face value. And, you're exactly right about that, Matthew, and I just appreciate, your observation there. And it fits with the other things that we've been talking about with regard to the Second Amendment and all that kind of stuff. And, it's an inherent right, something that there from in ancient history and all that kind of stuff. All right, thank you, Matthew. Let's go to Michael in Columbus, Ohio. Michael, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hello, Brian.
Hey.
Thanks for taking my call again.
You bet.
I just wanted to say that kind of make a connection here with the left and the hypocrisy that's going on is anytime that we try and bring up the religion of Islam and the things that it says in it, like they're supposed to kill anyone that won't convert to Islam, or they're supposed to be slaves or less than, or work for the people of Islam. But that's okay. That's freedom of religion. That's their religious right. But anytime we bring up, and you hit on it a second ago, I think it's Luke 22:36, where as Christians, it's so important to us that we're supposed to be naked before we give up our sword. And anytime we bring that up, it's completely different, and that's not what's meant by that, and blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, it goes hand in hand that, they can say what they want about Islam, and it's okay, but the moment we bring up freedom of religion and relate it to the Second Amendment, there's no hearing it. And It's just, I think it's hypocrisy at its finest.
Yeah, it sure is. Thank you, Michael. That's a good example of that. And, it's even worse with Islam. You can't say anything critical about Islam. Right now in the UK, they're literally locking people up. I mean, they're putting people in prison who write or express criticisms of Facebook. They're not just taking down their Facebook page, they're throwing them in prison for just telling the truth about Islam. We'll be right back after the news. Stay with us. You are listening to Focal Point on the American Family Radio Network. I am Brian Fisher. News coming up. We'll be right back afterwards. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Announcing 3 new episodes of Ryan DeFrades' Secret Agent. These animated half-hour episodes will entertain children.
That's right!
Ryan DeFrades is a secret agent with a whole lot to learn, and he insists on working alone until he's paired with a very unlikely partner.
Mommy!
From American Family Studios, episodes 4, 5, and 6 are available now at afastore.net.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. A Texas man who allegedly had weapons stockpiled in a Boston area hotel tells police that he was on a classified mission. Jeff Manasso has more.
Police say 59-year-old Franco Bradley called them to report a burglary this weekend at his hotel in suburban Boston, where he and his common-law wife, 40-year-old Adrienne Jennings, were arrested after police discovered
Silencers, grenades, they discovered tactical vests.
Rifles, handguns, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition also found. Investigators say Bradley told them he's on a secret government mission, but he refused to go into detail. The ATF and FBI are also on the case. The Texas couple now facing 45 counts each and are being held without bail. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
A package bomb suspect has been arrested after explosive material was sent to several government facilities in the D.C. area. Jared Halpern reports.
A suspect has been arrested in Washington state for sending packages packed with explosive material to military bases in the D.C. area. No motive has been released yet. All the packages were detected before being opened and caused no damage or injuries, though officials warn more packages may still be undiscovered. More than 5 locations were targeted, including the White House and CIA mail facilities located at a military base in D.C.
A conservative military watchdog says President Trump has done the right thing by issuing a new directive regarding so-called transgender military service.
Late Friday, Trump issued a new executive order that prohibits transgender individuals from serving in the armed forces except under very limited circumstances. The new order comes based on findings in a new 44-page Department of Defense study and the recommendation of Defense Secretary James Mattis. Elaine Donnelly, who is president of the Center for Military Readiness, has high praise for the report.
I appreciate the fact that the report is completely fact-based. It quotes many new sources, experts in the field of psychology, endocrinology, and otherwise people who know what they're talking about when it comes to these psychological conditions, which can be very complex.
Donnelly says while they have taken a big step to eliminate political correctness in the military, there are still more steps that need to be taken.
The federal judges still are running the military, and you can see the difficulties here because of the court orders. It's almost a bifurcated policy now. We have Obama's policies upheld by the courts. In the meantime, Secretary Mattis and President Trump have said very clearly transgender persons who require or have undergone gender transition surgeries or treatments are disqualified from military service.
I'm Chad Groening.
This Sunday is Easter or Resurrection Sunday, but it also happens to be April Fool's Day. Chris Woodward has more on one pastor's effort to win the day for Christ.
First Baptist Dallas is plastering billboards all over the city of Dallas with the following sermon topic: the resurrection, foolish, fake news, or fact. Pastor Robert Jeffress talked about the effort on the Janet Mefford Live program.
There is objective evidence outside the Bible that this occurred. And if it really happened, Janet, that has a profound implication, not just for Christians, but for everybody.
Jeffress said that Jesus' resurrection was proof that he was who he said he was, the Son of God.
And if he's who he said he was, then it means everything he said is true, including saying in John 14:6, that faith in him is the only way to God. So we're trying to address skeptics, invite skeptics to come this Sunday to understand why there's evidence that Christ arose from the dead and what that evidence means to their lives.
That evidence, said Jeffress, includes the early acceptance of the resurrection message.
The Gospels were written between 40 to 60 A.D., and the fact that that message was embraced and eagerly accepted and that Christianity grew and grew proves the fact that the faith is built on fact and not a lie. And then the second evidence, which really is external evidence, is the empty tomb. The fact that nobody has found Jesus' body in 2,000 years argues closely for the resurrection.
I'm Chris Woodward.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
All of chapter 4 through 19 has to do with what God is going to do when He pours out His wrath upon the earth. The church won't be here. The church will be in heaven. How do we know that? We just looked in through the door and the church is up there already.
Join Dr. David Jeremiah for his series Escape the Coming Night, next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
A change to the 2020 census is sparking controversy.
The Trump administration is set to add a question about citizenship in the next census.
This data is critical to the department's enforcement of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Well, now the California Attorney General is suing. He writes, quote, including a citizenship question on the 2020 census is not just a bad idea, it is illegal.
Almost every census between 1820 and 1950 had it in some form. Well, Democrats today are blasting the move.
I don't know how it's illegal for a federal agency like the Census Bureau to ask questions.
So I think people thought there was going to be like a smoking gun here. Did we miss something?
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Hi, welcome to the second hour of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name, congenial, convivial, and amiable as always. Glad to have you in the conversation however you got here. Live streaming us on Facebook, live streaming us on YouTube, listening to us on one of our 184 radio stations, live streaming us, audio streaming, by going to our website, AFR.net, catching us using the app for the iPhone, the Android, where you can listen on the go, or catching us via podcast, when you can listen to the program at your leisure after it's over. And don't forget, we record the live stream on Facebook. We upload it to the Facebook page right after the program. And the same thing with YouTube. It's automatically available on our YouTube website. You can go to the YouTube website, by the way, and you can subscribe. Encourage you to do that. Go to our YouTube site, Focal Point YouTube site, and you can subscribe, and you'll get a little notification. Click the little bell in the upper right-hand corner. You'll get a notification every time the next broadcast of Focal Point starts.
Just to let people know, it's a little easier on the search for your Focal Point YouTube page is to search it with Focal Point with Brian Fisher, because there's a lot of other kind of Focal Point things out there, but that'll help a lot.
Focal Point with Brian Fisher ought to take you right to it. This I thought was kind of interesting. This whole business about this brouhaha over Stormy Daniels and her supposed affair with Donald Trump back in 2006. It's interesting to observe how flat everybody on the left has been with the interview on 60 Minutes on Sunday night. Everybody just seems to be let down by this thing. They were expecting more fireworks. They were expecting more sizzle, whatever, and they didn't get it. And everybody's just kind of bummed out about it. Even on The View, if you can believe it. Here is the ladies of The View, clip number 1, and they've got Stormy Daniels' attorney, this Michael Avenatti, on there, and here is Whoopi talking to him, and you can tell how disappointed she is.
So I think people thought there was going to be like a smoking gun here. Did we miss something?
In other words, there was no smoking gun as far as we could tell. Did we miss it? So you think about this for a second. If you think about the ladies on The View and their open hostility, disregard, contempt for Donald Trump, if they couldn't find anything in this to beat Donald Trump about the head and shoulders with, then this is something that's not going to go anywhere. It's not gaining any traction. It might even be true. I believe it probably is. I can see no reason for Donald Trump to arrange for a $130,000 payment to this woman to buy her silence unless something happened. So I don't have any difficulty believing that it actually happened. But you know, the standards, and maybe it says something about our culture. You know, the standards were so lowered in the Bill Clinton presidency that it's virtually impossible now for anybody to get in trouble with what they do sexually. You know, you look at all the scandal around the Me Too movement. You know, what got Kevin Spacey is doing it with teenage boys. That's what got him in trouble. And you did have a number of Hollywood moguls got in trouble because they forced themselves, and so there was the idea they were violating the idea of consensuality and all that, as if it was consensual, it would be just fine. Well, it's still immorality or it's still adultery, even if it's consensual. It's not fine. You know, and somebody made the point, produced a little meme with Stormy Daniels, who is a pornographic actress, talking with Anderson Cooper, who is an open, loud, and proud homosexual, and spending an hour talking about morality. Yeah. There's a hoot for you right there. So anyway, you know, so it's just a sign of where our culture is at, where something that, you know, maybe a generation ago would be a huge scandal. Remember, Gary Hart was running for president in 1988, and there was just a picture of him with a woman that went on to be involved in an anti-pornography crusade. I forget her name now. Last name was Hughes, I believe. But anyway, just a picture of the two of them on his yacht. And that was it. That was the end of his candidacy. So even just a generation ago, the standards were different in the public arena, and I don't think the changes represent an improvement. Now, Planned Parenthood did something that you will find, easy to believe, kind of hard to stomach. But they sent out a tweet. This is the Planned Parenthood from Pennsylvania, Planned Parenthood Keystone, sent out a tweet. We need a Disney princess who's had an abortion. Also said, we need a Disney princess who is trans. So this was something they sent out today, March 27. And Ben Shapiro responded by saying, yeah, right. We need a Disney princess who stumps for sex-selective abortions on the taxpayer dime and then lectures us about what small children they would have killed should watch for entertainment. And that stung Planned Parenthood Keystone enough that they pulled that tweet down. They deleted it altogether. And this is an interesting thing. I've hesitated in talking about this because it exposes a rift in the pro-life community, but I think it's time to kind of bring this rift to light. You know, our good friend Janet Porter has sponsored a bill, written a bill, and sponsored a bill called the Heartbeat Bill. And this is a bill that would prohibit an abortion after a fetal heartbeat can be detected. In other words, an abortionist, before he performs the abortion, would be required to perform an ultrasound on the baby, and if he can detect a heartbeat, a fetal heartbeat, then he would not be allowed to go through with the abortion. You can detect a fetal heartbeat, from my understanding, between 6 and 7 weeks. So it would move the window all the way back to the first half of the first trimester. And she sponsored this. She got it through the House in Ohio. She even got it introduced in the House of Representatives, and then it got completely blocked. And again, I don't want to say anything bad about national right to life. I'll allow you to make your own decision about this. I'm just saying there is a rift right now between different branches of the pro-life movement, and what Steve King, Representative Steve King from Iowa, strong pro-lifer, he's saying the organization that is stopping these heartbeat bills from advancing is National Right to Life. They think it's premature. They think that Roe v. Wade is the law of the land, and therefore this is a waste of effort. It's just going to get overturned. We shouldn't waste our time with this because the law of the land is Roe v. Wade, that abortion is legal. You know, and of course the problem, and here's the deal. John Boehner, back in the day when he was still Speaker, He made an informal rule, instituted an informal rule, that there would be no pro-life legislation that would be allowed to come to the floor of the House unless it had the support of not only the Family Research Council and the Susan B. Anthony list, but also the support of the National Right to Life Committee. So National Right to Life Committee then, well, either one of these three organizations, I haven't heard where Family Research Council is positioned on this bill or the Susan B. Anthony list, but we know where National Right to Life is. And they were given by John Boehner veto power over the heartbeat bill. And remember, we used to have bumper stickers, abortion stops a beating heart. It is an absolutely true fact. A little bit more on the other side of the break. We'll be right back. Focal Point, American Family Radio. Stick with us.
Here's Twyla Brace, president of CCHF, with today's Health Freedom Minute.
If you've listened to this program over the years, you know HIPAA does not protect privacy. It does the opposite, leaving patients vulnerable to profiling, research, and outside controls on medical treatment. But one group of patients still has privacy rights, those who are being treated for substance abuse. Their data cannot be shared without their consent. But now Congress is trying to repeal these consent requirements to allow broad sharing of this private information. The Senate has passed the bill, and a House hearing was held last week. Tell Congress to protect consent rights and to keep private data private. Instead of repealing consent for these patients, they should restore consent rights to all patients.
Learn more about protecting your healthcare choices. Sign up for the CCHF Weekly E-News Update at cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
We are not allowed to have a U-Haul that comes to heaven with us.
Anna Marie Travers has an AFA Foundation charitable gift annuity.
The Lord has given us things that we can acquire, but you know, everything will stay here, and I'm so thankful for the American Family Annuity Fund, where we can give some to something that we so highly value.
Through the AFA Foundation, a charitable gift annuity provides a monthly income as well as a legacy of support for the American Family Association.
I cannot recommend a better person than they have at AFA to help you with getting your annuity fund. It was so easy.
Call the AFA Foundation today to find out how you can set up a charitable gift annuity. Just call 800-326-4543, extension 345.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Brian Fisher, program Focal Point, Network American Family Radio. Welcome back. Great to have you in the conversation. Just to close the loop on this discussion about this pro-life bill, again, National Right to Life, their official position is they're not opposing this bill. So they've withdrawn their active opposition to this bill, but apparently their historical opposition to it is kind of killing its chances to go anywhere in Congress, in the House, and they're working behind the scenes, according to Representative Steve King, to kind of kill this thing. And there's a mistake in the part of the way that National Right to Life argues against this bill. They argue that current federal law regarding abortion, this is a quote, that current federal law regarding abortion is clearly outlined in the Roe versus Wade decision of 1973. Well, notice the mistake that they make there, and this is an egregious mistake, is they calling it federal law. And you and I both know that a Supreme Court ruling does not establish federal law. They have no power, according to the Constitution, whatsoever to enact law, because all legislative powers, that's a direct quote, all legislative powers, this is Article 1, first words of the Constitution, are vested in a Congress consisting of a House and a Senate. So only Congress can enact legislation. Supreme Court cannot do it. Their job is not to enact legislation, but to apply it to the controversies that come before them. So they have no ability to establish federal law, and National Right to Life makes that mistake in this statement. They think this is the law of the land. It is not. And you think about this for a second. How in the world are we ever going to be able to challenge Roe v. Wade unless somebody challenges it? Unless you come up with a piece of legislation that is struck down by a lower court, you appeal it, it goes to a higher court, maybe it's struck down again, you appeal it, winds up at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court considers it. You know, this 15-week bill in Mississippi that bans abortions after 15 weeks, that could lead to the overturn of Roe v. Wade. It's already been struck down by a little tin pot dictator federal judge by the name of Carlton Reeves, who just vetoes anything conservative can get his hands on. But this is how bad Supreme Court presidents get overturned. Somebody has to challenge a bad Supreme Court precedent. Now, I think National Right to Life would be the first to agree that Roe v. Wade is bad Supreme Court precedent. It's not the law. It's bad law if it is. And they would argue that it was improperly ruled. It was improperly founded, improperly reasoned, improperly argued. And so that's what Right to Life would argue, but they don't want to challenge it because they're afraid it's simply going to be upheld. Well, you know, at some point you got to challenge it. I mean, you think about the fact that the Supreme Court ruled in 1986 that homosexual behavior can be criminalized. Then 17 years later, in 2003, they changed their mind and said, no, you can't criminalize homosexual behavior. You know, they ruled in 2013 that marriage is a matter for the states to decide. Gay marriage is a state issue. In 2015, they ruled, no, it's not. We're going to impose it on the entire country. Well, the only reason you got those reversals is somebody challenged the ruling of the Supreme Court. So at some point, you have to do that. You got to challenge the ruling of the Supreme Court, get it before the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. So I don't know how Right to Life expects that we're going to get rid of Roe v. Wade unless we challenge it in court. And by the way, a number of national pro-life groups didn't say anything when the governor of Mississippi signed a law that bans abortions on babies older than 15 weeks. The silence out there from pro-life groups was virtually deafening. Now, Mississippi is the leading state in the union. We've got the strongest pro-life laws in the state of Mississippi, and it's like pro-life laws don't exactly know what to do with that. They don't know how to view that. You know, and this is what Representative King said, if you're not willing to challenge the Supreme Court on abortion, quote, then you also need to be willing to accept the burden of guilt that comes along with accepting 1 million abortions a year in perpetuity in the United States of America. And that's part of the genius behind the 15-week abortion ban, is the possibility that this could provide the energy to get Roe v. Wade before the Supreme Court for review and possibly have it struck down. By the way, on the abortion issue, you know, we touched on this story just briefly before, but there is a California student, now get this, nationalreview.com, a California student is going to lead a school walkout on April 11 to protest abortion, just like the students at Parkland and all over the country were allowed to leave school to protest guns. He says, well, what's good for the goose, good for the gander. If you can have a march and students can be excused from class and they can leave the school grounds to go out there and march against guns, then we're going to do the same thing to March for Life. That's going to be on April 11. It's Rockland High School student Brandon Gillespie. I'm familiar with Rockland High School just by name. That's where the 49ers used to have their summer camp. But he's accusing the school of practicing a double standard by not approving of this march. Gillespie is going to meet with the principal of the school on Friday and is asking for the same accommodation the gun control protesters asked for, a 17-minute walkout at 10 a.m. So that's what they're asking for. They want the same exact treatment, no different than the anti-gun folks got, 17 minutes at 10 a.m. to have their march, their walkout march. And they're going to do it anyway. They're going to go ahead and have their pro-life walkout in protest if the school will not grant them the liberty to do it. And remember, this goes back to his history teacher, Julianne Benzel. This became national news. She was in class, and she wondered openly in class if the administration would have a problem with a March for Life. And for that, she was actually suspended. She had a spotless record, 20-year teacher, mother of 5 children, and she was told not to come back to work for just raising the question. What do you think the administration would do if you can't raise a question like that in class, where in the world are you going to raise that question? And there was so much outrage in the community that she got her job back virtually without a peep, because people realized the flagrant double standard. So anyway, April 11, going to be a March for Life, 17-minute student walkout to take a stand on behalf of human life.
And Brian, I wonder if students did something similar to this in Baltimore or other schools that use taxpayer funding or school money to for buses or to provide special events. I mean, would they have to also provide buses and transportation, otherwise be considered discriminatory?
Right, it would be. It would be. So if they describe it if they make it available for one purpose that they think is noble or whatever, then they've got to do it for another purpose that's equally noble. Now, a couple of other items before we get to the break. Facebook could be in real trouble for providing the Obama campaign with favors. Remember, there's been a lot of dust in the air over whether they violated campaign laws and what they did for Donald Trump. Trump's campaign got access to about 50 million profiles. Well, at least that's what they're charged with through this Cambridge Analytica group. Now, there's a real question now about whether the Trump campaign actually used information from Facebook or not. But let's say, for the sake of argument, they did get some information from Facebook. Now, what Trump did is they hired Analytica, Cambridge Analytica, and they paid them. It's right on the FEC, the Federal Election Commission. It's right on their database, right on their website, that the Trump campaign paid for everything that they got through Cambridge Analytica, which in turn got their information from Facebook. Well, Barack Obama didn't do that. His campaign didn't do that because Facebook said, look, we're on your side. So we're going to give you stuff. We're not going to make you pay for it. But that's against the law. Private corporations are not allowed to provide, quote, anything of value, end quote, which includes any, quote, in-kind contribution, end quote. They cannot provide for free any services or anything of value without it being paid for. They don't want them taking sides in political campaigns. That's exactly what Facebook did. And, of course, back then they were doing it for a liberal, for Barack Obama, and so the left was excited about that. They had no problem with it. They had absolutely no problem with what Facebook was doing until it looked like they were helping Donald Trump. And then as soon as it looked like Facebook was doing the same exact thing for Donald Trump that they did for Barack Obama, the screeching and the hollering and the banging on the tin pans and pots began. Now, according to Carol Davidson, she's the former media director for Obama for America, Facebook gave the 2012 Obama campaign direct access to the personal data of Facebook users in violation of its internal rules. They made a special exception for the Obama campaign. Now, the Daily Mail reported that on March 18, Davidson tweeted out that Facebook employees actually came to the campaign office and were very candid, quote, that they allowed us to do things they wouldn't have allowed someone else to do because they were on our side. That's the word from Facebook employees, came to the Obama campaign offices. We are letting you do stuff that we would not permit anybody else on planet Earth to do. So they could be in some serious trouble because, I mean, it was millions and millions and millions. I mean, 50 million profiles is what we're talking about right now with the Trump campaign, but it was much bigger than that with the Obama campaign. So they, and the Trump campaign paid for whatever they got. The Obama campaign apparently didn't pay a dime for the stuff they got, and that is a flagrant violation of campaign law. Update on the Chinese space station. Still going to crash to Earth between March 30 now and April 2. Nobody knows where it's going to land. They expect it to unleash a series of fireballs as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. Most of it will just be burned to cinder. You know, that's why they had that. That was the concern they had for the space shuttle. getting that thing to re-enter. They had to have those tiles on the front of the spaceship that could withstand an enormous amount of heat. This isn't designed for that, so it's just going to burn to a crisp, just the friction as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. But they're still saying that there are some cities in the United States that are at risk of this thing landing on 8.5 tons worth. Boston, Des Moines, Iowa, Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Salt Lake City. In the history of spaceflight, no casualties due to falling space debris have ever been confirmed, but it could be quite a show. Series of fireballs streaking across the sky. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Focal Point, American Family Radio.
Hi, I'm Jan Harper. If you're a pastor's wife like me, you probably know what it feels like to live in a fishbowl. You know, that feeling like everybody is watching your every move?
The annual AFA Pastor and Wife Fishbowl Retreat is 3 days and 2 nights of relaxation and building relationships. The retreat is hosted by Pastor Bert Harper of Exploring the Word and his wife Jan. Special guest speakers will include AFR morning personality J.J. Jasper and his wife Melanie. The AFA Fishbowl Retreat is set for October 9 through 11 at the Linden Valley Conference Center in Linden, Tennessee. Call 800-326-4543 extension 300 for registration and information. That's 800-326-4543 extension 300. Or visit repairingthefoundations.net. Registration is limited to the first 35 couples.
Get out of the fishbowl and into the AFA Pastor and Wife Fishbowl Retreat. We'll see you there.
Hi, this is Steve Tiber with 8 Days of Hope. We've seen God open up so many doors for us to help serve and love those who get affected by a natural disaster.
As the trees and the wind started crashing down around us, my wife was, of course, very diligently praying, Lord, please be with us.
Very simply, we do it because God commands us to love others.
I see these volunteers all as a gift from God.
And I'm just grateful they're here, helping out. It's a blessing.
If you're interested in becoming a part of what God's doing through 8 Days of Hope, please go to 8daysofhope.com, click on Get Involved, submit your email address.
I've noticed that whenever there's a time in my life when things might be a little gloomy, the number one thing that I can do is to go serve somebody.
And I would encourage anyone else to, it's worth it. Come out and do it next time if you did make it to this one, and the Father will really bless you in it.
Thank you so much for your prayers and volunteering with 8 Days of Hope.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Video segments of today's program will be posted at afr.net and on the Focal Point Facebook page. You'll also find the best collection of Brian's resources on our Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, be among the very first every morning to find out what the day's show will be about. Just follow Brian at Brian J. Fisher.
Brian J. Fisher.
Hi, welcome back to Focal Point. Brian Fisher is my name. Program is Focal Point, home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. A couple of quick things. Apple's coming out with a $329 iPad. Now, the purpose of this iPad is to compete with Google's Chromebook. That's what I use. I use a Google Chromebook at home. It's a dandy little machine. It's very quick. It's very nimble. You got to do all your stuff in the cloud. You got to have your documents in the cloud and your pictures in the cloud and all that kind of stuff. So there's very little storage capacity on the machine itself. But man, it's quick and it's nimble and it's convenient and it's cheap. I think I paid $249 for my Chromebook, and it's I'm very happy with it. And what happened is Google Chromebook has been taken over in the education system in the schools because it's inexpensive. You can get them for even less than that if you're willing. And so Apple's getting aced out of the education market because their MacBooks and stuff are several times that. So they're coming out with a $329 iPad, $299 for schools to try to compete. And that, by the way, is a reminder of the great lesson about the free enterprise system. Yeah. Competition is good for whom? Competition is good for the consumer. That's right. Competition is good for you. That's why you do not want government picking winners and losers in the free market. You want them competing without any kind of restrictions, without any kind of interference from government. The only role of government in the economy is to enforce contracts. You know, you sign a contract with somebody, they sign a contract with you, and they don't keep it. That's when you call on government to come in and set things right. Other than that, it ought to be just open competition. Media Research Center, our good friend Dan Gaynor, he won't be on this week because Friday is Good Friday, and we will be closed. We'll have a special program, by the way, on Friday from 2:30 to 3, featuring a 28-minute program on the last words of Jesus. You want to stick around for that on Friday. Oh yeah, Debbie says, well, I had to buy 2 Google Chromes. She's the executive producer, letting me know that her computer was 2 something. My computer was 4 something because I forgot it on the plane. When we flew back from Seattle, I took it. I was using it on the plane, and I took it out of my thing and I put it in the overhead bin just until I gathered my stuff, and then I was going to grab it out of the overhead bin and leave the plane, and I left it there. You know, and I sent them the thing there, find your lost luggage, stuff like that. It never turned up, so it's just gone. So anyway, Debbie reminding me that I had to pay twice as much as she had to pay for hers.
We're big Apple fans. We use at my house, and I'm excited to hear that Susan's due a new computer, and that sounds like something she could use.
It's a handy little machine, you know. And again, you know, $250. I mean, you never want to lose something, but if you lose it and it only costs you $250, I mean, it's different than losing a $1,000 or $1,300 machine. It's a whole different deal. Anyway, our friends at Media Research Center, they have started a new initiative to fact check the fact checkers. You know, I used to have this outfit called PolitiFact, this website called PolitiFact. They were fact-checking me all the time back in the day. Everybody seems to be leaving me alone now, but at the time, they were fact-checking me all the time, once a week. PolitiFact would make a big deal out of fact-checking something that I'd said or something that I'd written, and they were wrong every time, but there was nobody to hold them accountable for that. Well, now Newsbusters, Media Research Center, they're going to go out there and hold these fact-checkers like Snopes and others, and PolitiFact. They're going to hold them accountable, so they're going to fact-check the fact-checkers. Couldn't happen a minute too soon. Trump's approval number is up to 42%, by the way, the highest it's been in 11 months. So think about this for a second. Again, this is an indication of what's happened in our culture. You know, with all of this Stormy Daniels stuff and all the scandal over that from 2006, his approval ratings have gone up. Even in the middle of all of the scandal and the effort of the media to compromise him and drag him down, his numbers are going up despite this scandal. So that tells you, our culture, and this is not a good thing, but our culture is in a way different place now where you can have this kind of sexual immorality and nobody bats an eye. Your approval numbers can go up when everybody knows about this. I mean, that's not a good sign for where our culture is at and where it is headed. But anyway.
Wonder, were those numbers taken before the signing of the omnibus spending bill too? I wonder if that's going to affect his approval rating.
I don't know. This is, I think this is just recent. This is a new CNN poll from
that's
today.
That's a CNN poll?
Yeah, okay. All right, say no more. No. And the interesting thing, they say in this poll, even though his approval rating is up to 42%, his disapproval is still at 54%, so he's still upside down 12 points, but his approval numbers are 7% higher than they were in February, and 2/3 of the people that they polled believe in the allegations about his affair. And despite that, his approval numbers are going up. That's kind of a sad commentary on where we're at as a culture.
That might be a good thing for Media Research Council to do as well, is kind of check the polls to see it, because nobody really believes those too much anymore.
Yeah, you have to take them all with like a pretty big grain of salt. So, and some of them have stopped even doing them. I think Reuters has stopped doing polls about politicians and political elections because they're just wrong so much of the time. They're hard to get a good accurate number. So again, here's an article talking about the response of the media to the 60 Minutes interview and how blasé everybody is. Everybody was thinking this was going to blow the lid off the deal, but the question that's asked by this column by Joseph A. Wolfson on Mediaite.com, what exactly was the earth-shattering takeaway? Even the most newsworthy portion of the interview when she described how a man threatened her in front of her infant daughter, doesn't have much in the way of legs, giving it's unlikely that Daniels and her legal team will ever track down the alleged perpetrator. What's so fascinating, he goes on, about this story isn't actually the story, it's the country's reaction to it, or lack thereof. Trump has mostly gone unscathed. And he even ties it back to how easy the media went on Bill Clinton. It kind of changed the political landscape altogether. Shockwaves went through the entertainment industry when the creators of South Park came out publicly saying that they are Republicans. What? They announced at an awards ceremony, "We are Republicans." Now, this is not, by the way, don't take this as a recommendation to watch South Park. It's rude, and it's crude, and it's vulgar, but I think they were probably shocked to find out that these guys actually belong to the Republican Party. By the way, James Comey got a clean bill of health when he reported that the FBI was not unable to unlock the iPhone of the San Bernardino killer. Remember that? They were trying to get inside the iPhone of that guy that shot those people to death at that Christmas luncheon or brunch, whatever. And the FBI, Comey said, we can't unlock this thing. We're going to need help from Apple to unlock this thing. Turns out he was right. I mean, Apple's security system was so secure, so sophisticated, so advanced that not even the FBI had the equipment right at the time to break it. They eventually found a workaround, were able to get in there without Apple's assistance because Apple refused to do it.
Why would they refuse that? That makes no sense.
Because the FBI stands for the rule of law and Apple doesn't. That's just about that simple. Now, very quickly, let's play clip number 3. This is Robert Menendez. Got 2 clips on this. Robert Menendez, this is a guy that ought to be in jail for 2 reasons. He was a frequent flyer on the Lolita Express, and also he was guilty of fraud. He covered for this guy that gave him kickbacks by committing Medicare fraud, and Bob Menendez covered for this guy. So anyway, this guy ought to be in jail. It was a hung jury, and they're probably not going to retry him. Anyway, there's a scandal that's brewing at the Department of the Interior because Ryan Zinke, if you can believe that this is a scandal, Ryan Zinke says, look, I don't care that much about diversity. What I care about is getting the best person for the job, the most qualified, the most able, the most proficient person for the job. That's all I care about. So I'm not going to make diversity hires. I'm not going to hire somebody that can't get the job done just because of the color of their skin. That's racism is what that is. You're making a decision based on the color of somebody's skin. Now, I would think actually the minorities ought to be excited about this. When they hear that color of skin is not going to be a factor, that means they're not going to get aced out by somebody who has a different color skin than they do if they've got the chops to do the job. They ought to be excited about this. If I can do the job, I'm going to get hired because I can do the job, not because of the color of my skin. But Zinke has just been hammered for what he said. Here is clip number 3, Bob Menendez.
Well, look, diversity doesn't come at the sacrifice of quality and the best people. On the contrary, we can find some of the best people in the nation from diverse communities, whether that diversity is ethnically, racially, or otherwise. The problem is that Zinke is clearly on a path in which I think we're going to have increasingly a lily white Department of the Interior. So I'm really concerned that this is one of many elements of the cabinet where diversity is not only not important, but it's not an effect. And if anything, diverse and excellent members of those departments increasingly seem to either be let go or pushed aside to a lower position. So it's a real challenge because, you know, the nation needs to, in its departments of the Interior, and for that fact, every federal department needs to look like the United States of America, and we can do that with the highest quality. We don't have to sacrifice quality in order to achieve diversity, and that's where the Secretary is absolutely wrong.
Well, Menendez is absolutely wrong. If you're going to make diversity your goal, you are absolutely going to sacrifice quality. I mean, it's a given. If your objective is to get the best and most highly qualified person for the job, regardless of skin color, you're going to focus on quality, and you're going to get quality. If you make any other driving thing your paramount factor, you're going to have to give up quality to get somebody who can't do the job as well as somebody else but has the right skin color. And he says, we got to have the Department of the Interior look like America. Well, let me ask you a question. Does the NBA look like America? Does the NFL look like America? Look at the Final Four coming up this weekend. There's going to be 20 starters. And just for fun, just count up. I'm going to watch both games on Saturday and the championship game on Monday. Just count up the number of starters in the Final Four on these NCAA teams that are black and the number that are white. You're probably not going to find but 2 or 3 starters that are white. That doesn't look like America. Do we complain about that? Absolutely not. Why? Because we know they need to get the best players for the position, regardless of skin color. We applaud that. We approve that. That's the way we do it in America. Back with your call. Stay with us.
Death is typically a frightening subject, one we would rather avoid. But this week on Truth for Life, Alistair Begg reminds us that for those who are in Christ, death has lost its sting. Be sure to join us Monday through Friday on Truth for Life with Alistair Begg.
Truth for Life, weekday mornings at 11:30 Central on AFR and online at afr.net.
Women and men alike find themselves in despair after an abortion. Every woman who had an abortion was for a short time a mother, every man a father. But afterwards, they're all people in pain, anger, sadness, relationship problems. These often accompany an abortion. But there is hope. Call 866-482-LIFE. Your call is confidential, and you'll be talking with someone who has already been where you are and found the way out. 866-482-LIFE.
For centuries, the Bible has inspired humanity and shaped the very world we live in. But how do we know this book is the Word of God and not merely the words of men?
What we believe about the Bible is based on what we believe about its source.
The God Who Speaks explores the evidence of the Bible's inspiration and authority through some of the world's most respected biblical scholars.
We have essentially a dual authorship. So it's true to say that Paul wrote Romans. It's equally true to say that God wrote Romans.
He says, we saw this, and that sets the Bible apart from almost everything else in the ancient world and its religious pantheon of gods and goddesses.
The God Who Speaks is a feature-length documentary from the American Family Association. Available now at thegodwhospeaks.org.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Focal Point. Brian Fisher.
Hi, and welcome back to this last segment of today's edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio. I am Brian Fisher. We'll take your calls in this segment, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Talk about anything that's been on the program this day, 888-589-8840. And by the way, just to close the loop on that Ryan Zinke story at the Department of the Interior, more than 40%, of the recent hires were non-white. So Zinke is doing okay in the minority department. A same judge back in who blocked Donald Trump's original ban on transgender people is taking another look at this newest ban on transgender people. District Judge Marcia Peckman in Seattle. She is going to wind up, I'm sure, setting aside this latest one, more judicial activism on the part of the federal judiciary. Again, this will be a little tin-pot dictator judge in Seattle, one judge, believing that she can shut down the entire federal government. And remember, there are 600 of these federal judges, 600 federal judges out there. And right now we're at a time because we are so messed up in our understanding of the Constitution. We are so messed up in our understanding of jurisdiction. These federal judges, she's in Seattle. That means her jurisdiction is limited somehow or other to the Seattle area. She's a district judge. So her jurisdiction is limited to a district. She does not have jurisdiction over the entire United States of America. But she thinks she does, and she pretends she does, and everybody lets her get away with it. Just aggravating to no end. All right, let's go to the phones. Let's begin. Hang on a second. While you're calling in, let me play this quick clip from Wolf Blitzer talking about Ryan Zinke again.
One of his talking points has been over the last year that diversity is not important, and rather that he wants the right person in the right job so that he can get the best people. Now, this has upset many people. I've heard him say this over the last 12 months or so. A lot of people believe that the Department of the Interior has long suffered from a lack of diversity, both in race and in gender, and that these kinds of comments are only making women and minorities who work there feel less welcome.
This isn't the first time he's been accused of something along these lines, coming up with the wrong tone when it comes to these kinds of sensitive issues. Tell us about that.
That's right. It's not the first time he's been accused of something like this. Just about a week ago, he came under quite a bit of fire for greeting a congresswoman, Colleen Hanabusa from Hawaii, with the greeting konnichiwa. That's a Japanese greeting, and it came after she asked him during a hearing about funding to preserve sites that were once Japanese internment camps during World War II.
You know, so apparently now there's something inappropriate about using a greeting in somebody's native language. Normally we think of that as a sign of courtesy, a sign of respect, a sign of kindness, but now Ryan Zinke apparently is getting dinged and zinged for that. You know, and those concentration camps for the Japanese in World War II, who was responsible for those? A Democrat president, FDR. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was responsible for every one of those internment camps for the Japanese in World War II. All right, let us go to Chris in Little Rock. Chris, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, Brian, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
You know, you were talking about the Facebook breach and, the information that got sold or whatever on Facebook. It was just a couple months ago where, the credit union got breached and 180 million people's information got stolen, and nothing is being said about that. That just kind of dropped off the radar.
Yeah. Well, you've had a number of these other very significant data breaches. In fact, I'll tell you, Chris, I kind of tune those out because we seem to have so many of those. I mean, like every week, there's another story about a data breach and millions of profiles and personal information have been compromised. So, I don't know how you protect yourself against all that. We use LifeLock, and we've never had any invasion of our personal data. But, there are different ways you can go about kind of protecting yourself. But it looks like it's going to be pretty important to kind of do that stuff. All right, Chris, you're right. And it's like they don't care about that. But this Facebook thing, that's getting a little bit of traction. Let's go to Jeff in Farmington, Missouri. Jeff, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brian, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to say that I'm going to start a network called WET. This guy named Monez, I guess he's the Secretary of State, that was talking about lily white people. We want a diverse group in the. Well, let me tell you something. I'm going to start a network called WET. It's called White Entertainment Television. Oh, wait, I'm racist now.
Yeah. Well, and you're right, Jeff. That would be the reaction. I mean, there really isn't any parity when it comes to that stuff. You almost everything you can think about, if you were to try to do the same thing as a white person and use the word white to describe it, you would just get pilloried and hammered and lampooned and run out of town. All right, let's go to Fred in Athens, West Virginia. Fred, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi, Brian. About the M16 AR-15 controversy, about what is an assault weapon. That's a very nebulous term. And an assault rifle has a distinct description. Among them is select fire. It must be able to shoot fully automatic. If not, it's not an assault rifle. And an assault weapon, Lizzie Borden used an axe. Are we going to outlaw axes because that was her choice of an assault weapon?
Right, yeah.
Hannibal used the elephant.
We have a ban the elephant program going on here. Well, and you're right. We've talked about this before, that the assault weapon, an assault rifle, is capable of being converted with just throw a switch and it will fire. It can become an automatic weapon, and an AR-15 just cannot. You can do the bump stock thing, which enables you to fire very rapidly, but that's not automatic because you still have to pull the trigger every time. The bump stock will enable you to do it faster than you normally could. All right, great call. Appreciate that. Good information, Fred. Thank you for that. Let's go to Frank in Kentucky. Frank, what's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hi, Brian.
Hey.
Talk to you about the Planned Parenthood.
Yes, sir.
And they're saying on the news that since you mentioned Planned Parenthood, kind of gave me a door to come in there. So anyway, they are saying that don't buy any cookies from Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood has put the Girl Scouts cookies. They've done some. They let the Girl Scouts volunteer to come into their midst, so to speak, and do some dirty things.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, well, I think, Frank, what you're talking about is there is a connection between the Girl Scouts and Planned Parenthood. They're linked with Planned Parenthood. They insist that they don't send any money to Planned Parenthood from the sale of Girl Scout cookies, but they definitely show up at Planned Parenthood events. Planned Parenthood shows up at Girl Scout events with their literature, with their propaganda. And so the reality is, if you buy cookies from the Girl Scouts, then you are helping Planned Parenthood because they work together. They're linked together in a lot of ways. And so again, I don't know the financial arrangements. The Girl Scouts insist that they don't give any money to Planned Parenthood. Not sure what the truth is on that. But anyway, they do work together. They are linked in a lot of public events. All right, Margaret in Becker, Mississippi. Margaret, welcome. What's on your mind?
These judges that keep wanting to make the laws, can't they be impeached?
They absolutely can, Margaret.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
No, go. Finish your thought.
I want to know why they haven't. I also would like to know why the Republicans haven't put the judges up there and send them to the president where he can sign it and get them in.
Well, I'll tell you one thing.
They can do that without the Democrats, can't they?
Yeah, they can, because all they need is 51 votes to confirm, and right now there are 51 Republicans. That's how they got Neil Gorsuch confirmed. The problem is, Margaret, the Democrats have a little loophole that they can use. Right now, at the rate that things are going, it will take Donald Trump 11 years to get all of his nominees confirmed because the Democrats are insisting on nitpicky rules. They are requiring that every one of these nominees get 30 hours of debate. So it just gums things up. It slows things down. So it's just moving at a snail's pace. Republicans typically will waive that right to the 30 hours of debate. Democrats will not do it. They're nitpicky. They're difficult. They're trying to gum up the process. So it's going to be 11 years before Donald Trump will get all of his nominees confirmed. But you're right, they can be impeached, Margaret. The Constitution says that judges serve during good behavior. There's not a thing in there about a lifetime appointment. So forget about that. You hear somebody say they serve a lifetime appointment? Not true. They serve during good behavior. I submit that judicial activism, like if this judge in Seattle, as a district judge, sets aside the ban on transgenders in the military and applies it to the whole country, that's judicial activism. She can and should be impeached because that is bad behavior. That is bad judicial behavior. Okay, Margaret, good question. Let's finish the hour with Kevin in Rossville, Indiana. Kevin, welcome. What's on your mind?
Well, good afternoon. Hey, it's a shame that women are being degraded by the left because when I see a woman in a high-ranking position, I don't know if she's there because of her genuine abilities or because she's been politically placed there. And so she's lost credibility because of the actions of the left. And during my time in the military, I always had a hard time looking at women as equal because how can I look at a woman whose equal rank is mine getting the same pay as me, but she has to do fewer sit-ups, fewer push-ups, has to run the mile and a half at a slower pace, and is not required to do the physical activities that I'm required to do.
Yeah.
So
well,
yep.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that. We're out of time, so I got to let you go, Kevin, but you're right about that. It's a disservice to minorities You know, Clarence Thomas has dealt with that his entire judicial career, that he only got the job on the Supreme Court because he was black. Stuck with him ever since. Be back tomorrow.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
In this 40th year celebration of the American Family Association, we invite you to help us remind America once again of the truth behind our national motto, "In God We Trust." You can do your part and display your faith with an "In God We Trust" car decal from the AFA store. Order yours today at afastore.net. That's afastore.net.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family Association.